I know AI seems like an easier way out, but if you inject technologies like AI into poorly functioning systems, you're just gonna make the systems function worse in a more efficient way.
Welcome to a brand new episode and a fairly new season of Starts at the Top, our podcast about leading differently. I'm Zoe Amar.
And I'm Paul Thomas. Our podcast exists to help leaders and their teams understand what they need to do differently today to prepare for the world of tomorrow. We started Starts at the Top as a podcast about digital disruption, but we soon realised that leaders were telling us about something more important and more urgent, about how traditional ways of leading had changed forever.
We make it our mission to speak to leaders who are carving out new ways of leading, covering topics from emerging tech to inclusion, from remote work to mental health and resilience, and from climate change to AI. If it's about the status of leadership in 2025, it will be on our podcast.
And we're not here for the shiny corporate case studies. We want to share stories from leaders who have learned lessons and made progress the hard way. We want our podcast to share ideas and inspire others.
In this episode, we'll be sharing our conversation with Steph Wright, head of the Scottish AI Alliance. Steph led on Data Lab's efforts in support of the Scottish Government in developing Scotland's AI strategy, and she's now leading on the delivery of the strategy's vision for Scotland to be a leader in the development and use of trustworthy, ethical and inclusive AI.
Steph is also co-founder of Diverse AI and was recognised as one of the 100 brilliant women in AI ethics in 2023. That's AI ethics, not AI in Essex. And one of the top 10 women in tech in Scotland in 2023. It was a really energising and fun conversation, and we can't wait for you to hear it. And talking of AI, I think we've got a couple of things to share, Zoe.
Yes, from two very different sectors. So first of all, and I should say that we're recording this on the Monday, the 6th of May, our response from the charity AI Task Force to the government's AI Opportunities Action Plan was published this morning. So for anyone who hasn't come across the charity AI Task Force, it's a group of funders, large charities, small charities and other organisations working with the sector who are looking to develop a collective, responsible, ethical and inclusive approach to AI. And people may have seen that the government published their Government AI Opportunities Action Plan earlier this year. And now that the task force was formed, which was announced a few weeks ago, back in February, we've developed a response which essentially makes the case for why civil society needs to be a vital part of delivering the action plan itself. There is no mention of civil society or charities in the plan, which is surprising. Everything in the plan is going to affect civil society because the whole notion of the plan is that it's about making AI work for everyone and also developing world-class AI products and services that's essentially going to make the UK a global leader in this field. And we think that's only possible with the input of civil society because of the incredible knowledge that charities have of communities and some really important social issues affecting so many people in UK society. So that's what we want to bring to the table. We want to start a conversation with government about that. We would like the Charity AI Task Force to have parity with the SME Task Force, which is also looking at digital and AI adoption across the small business sector. And I'll put the link in the show notes to our response to government, and people can let us know what they think of it.
Remind us of who's involved in that task force.
Yeah, so we've got some amazing organisations involved. So on the funders side, we've got Lloyds Bank Foundation. We've got some other really exciting organisations involved on the large charities side, such as Shelter. We're lucky we've got a really, really good group of people, and I can say a bit more about them in a moment. But I just want to reinforce the point that it really is a cross-sector effort with funders and also charities of different sizes getting involved to develop a collective response, because currently there isn't really a focal point for AI in the charity sector at the moment. There isn't one body that's leading the charge. And even on the task force, we will need to pick and choose what we can get involved in. And some of it might be about bringing people together or getting joined into some of the work. There's some great work going on around AI and innovation in the sector. So we're still developing on what that role is going to look like specifically and how it will work on the ground. But we've had some really great conversations with charities ever since the task force was launched. We're developing a roadmap for the next 6 months. We've got a meeting of the task force coming up in June. So that, alongside the relationship that we want to develop with government, means that I should have a lot more to share about where the task force is going in the future on this podcast.
And a lot more to say, so we'll update on that for sure. And as you said, another piece of interesting AI stuff from a completely different sector is a report that I've been spending a bit of time looking at. It's a global research report released by Chartered Accountants Worldwide and Ipsos a few weeks ago. I'll highlight it here because it would sit neatly alongside the work that the task force is doing. But I think it's one of the first reports I've seen that's gone into AI in the accountancy sector in any detail whatsoever. There will be plenty more. And I think that's the challenge with the world that I exist in, is that I think a lot of this is going to be competing with Chartered Accountants Worldwide look after all of the umbrella organisations that look after accountants in each country. So in the UK, for example, ICAEW, and they will work with those umbrella organisations to publish this set of guidance. But this is very much an early stage report. So what I think we'll probably do is write it up in a post that we can share through our website and maybe talk about it on the podcast in a future episode. But I wanted to flag it. I'll include it in the show notes so people can go off and have a look. And just in terms of a couple of headlines, I think the main point that the report is making is, like most industries, chartered accountants are very eager to embrace AI. 85% of those surveyed said that they were fairly willing to use AI given the opportunity, but most feel very unprepared for the changes that AI will bring, especially with how it fits within organizational strategy and particularly ethically, particularly as they work with client data and client numbers. So I think that's really important to get right. We will share a link to the report in the show notes and we'll discuss it more in a future episode.
Yeah, I'd love to do that. And I have to say, some of those trends you've highlighted there really chime with what we see year on year in the Charity Digital Skills Report, that most charities are really keen to do more with AI. And we also know we've got a significant amount of charities using AI now. But of course, one of the challenges is, what do we do next? Are we prepared? And it's that thing of being in a state of readiness. And I describe it as almost constant readiness and continuous improvement to be ready for the tech as it develops even further is the thing that we all need to get used to now. So it sounds like accountants and charities have more in common than we both thought.
Probably have. And I think that the challenge for the accountants in particular is that most of the big firms are already selling AI as a service to their clients, and some of the smaller firms will feel like they're being left behind. So I think the report talks about how there's a lot of confusion and nobody's not really sure where to start and how to get started. But they've got to go from a sort of a lack of knowledge, almost zero to hero in a very short space of time, so that they can keep up and compete with their competitors. And there's an awful lot of private equity consolidation in the sector as well at the moment. And I think that leads to challenges as well, with the bigger firms, the consolidated firms, being able to spend an awful lot of money on technology, and some of the smaller firms trying hard to keep up. So that sense of parity and then fairness that I think the Charity Task Force is bringing is something that might be badly needed in the accountancy world as well.
Oh, so we're talking about a bifurcated market, right? So this is interesting because I was looking at law firms and AI when I was working with an advice sector charity recently. The big guns, so Clifford Chance, who I used to work for back in the day, selling things like, law tech and some looking at developing AI products is my understanding, is what some of those big firms are doing now. And then you will have law firms that are just starting to think about using Copilot. And it's some of those, basically the winners in whatever sector you're in are going to win big. And part of that is going to be about proprietary tech, it's going to be about partnerships, and it's going to be about skills. And those are the three things that leaders in any sector need to focus on now if they want their organizations to have a role in the future and still be relevant.
And I think it's that skills gap that's the biggest worry, because from what I've read so far, trying to lean on the accountancy bodies to introduce and run that training is probably right. There's probably got to be some kind of guidance and a framework set. But unless they get on the front foot, unless firms get on the front foot themselves and start to invest in understanding how AI is going to work in their particular world with their particular clients, and also start having a conversation about it with clients. Don't wait to engage with your clients in a conversation about AI and wait for all the answers, because it's unlikely that you'll have them, or at least that it will be answers in a journey that you'll go through for a long period of time. So you may as well go through it together. An open conversation with clients about your intentions to use or not use AI is probably a really good plan. But again, like law firms, I think what you'll see is the bigger firms investing in skills training and proprietary AI, as you said. They won't have to wait around for software vendors to introduce AI into their products. They'll be using it and building it themselves. So those people that grow up in and learn in that environment are going to have an advantage, unless smaller firms take a lead on their own training and invest in it. So yeah, it's an interesting time for many types of businesses and charities. And yeah, like you and I, just getting to grips with all of this as well. It did remind me actually of writing my first social media policy back in 2010, working at Grant Thornton and writing a social media policy that sort of said, yes, you need to be cautious, but you also need to have sort of open experimentation and try this out, And I think it's very much the same story here, that you must go out and you must experiment. You must try to sort of use the tools and not get too bogged down in the security implications. Yes, the security of it is very, very important, but don't sort of hold back on experimentation for the sake of being extremely security aware. But that's why you need the policies and the strategies in place, the frameworks in place to truly understand it.
Absolutely. And on that note, here is our interview with Steph. We are very excited to welcome Steph Wright to Starts at the Top today. Steph is head of the Scottish AI Alliance, and we're really excited to speak to her. She's got a diverse background ranging from astrophysics to genomics in academia and film and TV to dance in the arts and the third sector. Project and programme management professional, she loves to develop and build collaborations across organisations to help people with their data and AI journey. Steph led on Data Lab's efforts in support of the Scottish Government in developing Scotland's AI strategy, and she's now leading on the delivery of the strategy's vision for Scotland to be a leader in the development and use of trustworthy, ethical and inclusive AI. She is also co-founder of Diverse AI and was recognised as one of the 100 brilliant women in AI ethics in 2023 and one of the top 10 women in tech in Scotland in 2023. She was also awarded the 2024 Data IQ Award for Data and AI for Good Champion. Steph, we are so excited to have you on Starts at the Top. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
We're thrilled to have you here because so many of the things that we've just heard about from your bio absolutely resonate with what we know our listeners love to hear about, not least your own leadership journey. So you've had this really fascinating career path. It was so interesting there to hear about how you've done everything from study the stars to working in dance, and now obviously you're leading on Scotland's AI strategy. How did these different experiences shape your thinking, and how did they lead to ultimately helping you make AI work for everyone?
Well, trying to make AI work for everyone, I think is the key thing.
Yeah, not on your shoulders there, Steph. Yes.
I think there's quite a lot of us on the effort, so it's not just me, of course. But no, I have had a very bizarre and diverse career path, which always takes a bit of explaining to people. But I think that diversity probably shapes who I am today, and being able to obviously include many different perspectives and points of view on things. When I've always been interested in everything, and it just so happened, when I did my UCAS form, I wanted to do astrophysics, partly due to a very inspirational physics teacher I had at A levels. And astrophysics and physics was very much hard science, that kind of, and for years you kind of have that perspective of, yeah, there's the proper physical sciences, and then there's the social sciences. They're not really sciences, but obviously, you're thinking, your approach, your perspective evolves as you, experience more and learn more. And then working in the arts gave me a fantastic perspective on the world, I think. And then going back into the world of academia, I came through like the genomics side, especially the social science or genomics side of things. And I think, it's kind of given me a much more rounded world view. And therefore, I think it helps with trying to achieve some balance really in the world of AI, because it is very, very polarized. It's there's a lot of binary thinking around AI out there, and I don't think that is actually for the benefit of all, really, in the world of AI, because there's so much hype, yet there's so much fear. And the truth is, for me, it's a technology that could make an incredible difference to how we live, we work, etc. in the world, but not in the current way it's being driven, because it's very much driven by a desire for profits, and not really for the public good. And I think, it definitely benefits from a diversity of thought, because there isn't very much right now in the leading narrative around AI.
100% agree. And especially looking at some of the global leaders in AI at the moment. Yeah, that whole point about diversity and limited perspectives is definitely something which is a massive shared concern at the moment, isn't it? So if we bring this back to the amazing work you're doing, heading up Scotland's AI strategy, and obviously there's that sort of collective leadership and responsibility that we talked about as well earlier. What do you think is the trickiest part of how we make that AI development ethical and inclusive? Because that's one of the tensions at the moment, isn't it, in the AI landscape that we're seeing, in the different approaches taking shape across different countries.
Yeah, I mean, the tension is very much there. And I had the honor of being at the Paris summit a few weeks ago, and that tension was very, I don't know, I felt it was quite obvious, and I think the problem is that I think a lot of the mainstream narrative around AI and AI development kind of frames topics such as ethics and inclusion and diversity as negatives, as doom and gloom. But I want to flip that. Why is, making sure that things don't harm people, making sure that things don't, what we innovate with don't doesn't, exclude people, doesn't harm people, doesn't, negatively impact people. Why is that doom and gloom? Because surely we want to create technology that betters lives for everyone. One of the key speakers that was there, I absolutely loved what he said, where he said there is virtue in helping others. And we are currently, well, the current paradigm is, let's invest tons of money to build the fastest possible, most powerful possible model. But how about we shift some of that to what we already have to help each other? Because that drive to create the biggest, best AGI, whatever, it's for what? It's not to benefit people. It's a lot of it is so we can. And you're like, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And there is absolute virtue in helping people. There's absolute virtue and value in using technology to improve people's lives instead of just making a quick buck. And because ultimately that profit-driven narrative only benefits the few. And and I'm very much of the technology exists. We humans create technology to improve our lives. So let's have it do that instead of just the race to the bottom, which it currently is at the moment.
Totally agree. I really think we need to get away from all the bro metrics. My LLM is bigger and more powerful than your LLM. I mean, it's such a limited frame through which to look at this stuff.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, there's just this race to implement AI in everything without ever really properly stopping to say, do we need to? What exactly is the value of this other than, a market value to the vendors that are wanting to sell into that market? The truth is, not everything is a market and not everything should be a market. And another speaker at Paris was like saying, education isn't a market, it is a human endeavor. And we need to
Mm.
not forget that, that there is value and dignity in the process of learning and acquiring knowledge, and viewing it purely as a technical achievement that is a market to exploit, to sell into, is problematic. And everything is being viewed as a market to exploit, to sell into, without really properly thinking, does it actually add value, does it actually make things better? And when we talk to a lot of organizations, a lot of what we try to say is that absolutely, organizations should absolutely contemplate AI, should absolutely think about AI and think about what it could possibly do for their business. But there's not enough coverage to a narrative around, but not using AI is perfectly okay. If your conclusion is that actually AI isn't going to solve our problems, that is a perfectly valid decision. But the main narrative is kind of like around this inevitability that, AI will definitely do something for you. But the truth is, I don't think it will. It might do something in very specific circumstances, especially when people have identified the problems they need to solve. But the kind of often rolled out metaphors, AI is like to hammer everything is a nail. Like a lot of people are treating AI like a solution looking for a problem. It's starting with a, ooh, AI, that's cool, what can we use it for, instead of, ooh, what's my problem that I need solving, and is AI the right solution to solve it?
Yeah,
I
I
think we
can.
saw the absolute nadir of that, didn't we, a couple of weeks ago or a month or so ago, when the DeepSeek model from China came along, and it just had massive impact on financial markets. The current sort of top providers' share prices crashing, and that was the entire narrative. It was, here's a newer, better model that consumes less energy, whatever the benefits of it, but nobody really talking about how the conversation was progressing.
Yeah, absolutely. And the hilarious thing around it, right, is obviously OpenAI having a little fit about it, because it's like, oh,
Mm.
they stole our model, says the
Mm.
company that steals people's IP to train their models.
Yeah.
So I think it kind of shows as well the kind of craziness around all this. It had a $500 billion impact on the markets. And you just think, what could we possibly do with $500 billion in terms of
Yeah.
tackling some of the world's greatest challenges? Yet we are plowing all this into building data centers that ultimately consume a lot of power, consume a lot of water, especially when there are parts of the world that don't even have access to clean water. And there we are, using clean water to power these giant data centers to build these super powerful models that isn't the panacea we were hoping for, kind of thing. LLMs, the hype's still very much there. And for some specific use cases, I guess they are super, super useful and can be really helpful. But if you think about it, like I think what's the statistic, like each chat GPT prompt, uses 500 ml bottle of water, or each thread, is the equivalent of the emissions of so many cars per year. It's like you have to balance, is it worth it? Is what it's doing worth it? We only have one planet, and I know that there is this whole discourse around, the changing discourse around, oh, we're gonna miss our climate targets anyway, so let's go all in on AI to solve it. Like, okay, so you're gonna break the planet to create this tool that may or may not fix it. And I don't know about you, but I'd rather not gamble with our planet.
100%. It's one of the big issues of our time, isn't it? How do we meaningfully develop our use of AI in a responsible way, but really make sure we're not destroying the planet as a result?
I mean, it's interesting, the whole conversation around the environmental impact of LLM specifically, not all AI. We have to remember that these days when people talk about AI, they mean LLMs, but the truth is AI is many technologies. It's not a singular thing. But the problem is, it's being used that the term AI is just the proxy for LLMs, and that's what usually most people talk about when they talk about AI. But yeah, I mean, the climate impact of LLMs, AI technologies like LLMs, it's coming more to the fore in the past year. I think, maybe a year ago, it wasn't quite as big a deal, or not as many people are talking about it, but people are talking about it, which is great. I think there's a lot more discourse around that at the moment. And I guess the next step, perhaps is people understanding also, the kind of extractive and exploitative practices behind the training of these models that, once again, is very hidden, is very invisible, these kind of additional background processes that powers the thing you see. And I think the truth is most people don't know, right? If you didn't know that actually using ChatGPT to write you a cute little story or a little limerick, or create a stupid drawing or something for fun, uh, if you didn't know that actually doing that has an actual impact on the environment, you would just do it, wouldn't you? You'd think, hey, if you look at it in isolation, this is a cool tool that you can do cool things with. But I think it's important to give people an informed choice, that people understand the context behind it all. I always say it's a bit like the fast fashion industry. You remember the whole pushback on, sweatshops, etc. And yes, there are obviously still businesses that are a bit like that, but people know it and they're doing it. They're purchasing well, in an informed way, or have their reasons to ignore that, or to put that aside, and justify it. I'm not saying anything right or wrong, but but people have the information to make the decision. Right now, I think a lot of people don't understand what actually goes into LLMs, how the data is acquired, what training means. Training is such an abstract concept when they talk about training models, but the truth is a lot of data needs to be annotated and labeled, etc. And they tend to be done by people being exploited, in territories where there are less robust human rights protections or employment rights, labor rights, people in countries that are being paid, $1 a day, to annotate stuff. And not people not really understanding that's what training data means, because it's all being masked in this AI's magic kind of aura. And like, AI isn't magic, it's very, very clever technology, maths, in a way, and very clever computing. And I don't doubt that, absolutely AI is a fantastic, human innovative progress, but it is not the magic that is being presented as. And it's just, was it last month where there was some study where the more people know about how AI works, the less likely they are to use it and to trust it. And people took away from that as like, oh my God, we need to get people to trust it more, even though they know how to use it. And it's like, well, no, shouldn't you be taking that as commentary that people, like, once they understand it's not actually magic, they're less likely to go, ooh, look, it can do all these amazing things. I mean, it can do amazing things, that's the thing, but when applied correctly and when applied ethically in a trustworthy way, and a lot of it isn't at the moment, and that's a key problem.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think there's a lot of mystique around AI at the moment, which I think does go back to some of the, the kind of the type of leader we're seeing in this space, particularly with some of the people we talked about earlier. And I do think that's an issue. I think you're absolutely right. And as you were saying, so if one good thing that can come out of this, in the same way as with fast fashion, as you mentioned, people start to ask those questions about, well, what's really happening in the supply chain here? Who's involved, and are people being mistreated? Then I think that's a really, really good thing.
Yeah, I mean, you see in the news today that, over 1,000 artists released a silent album to protest, the UK's proposals on copyright law, where it's an opt-out system as opposed to an opt-in. And, so to someone using a tool like Studio, I think that's what it's called, Sudo, whatever, the music generation tool, it might seem like really good fun. But if you think there's people livelihoods that have been taken without their permission to create this cool thing for you, how is that fair? Like, copyright law exists to protect artists, exists that, especially in creative industries, obviously, copyright obviously expands beyond that, but it is there to create, protect people's livelihoods. And then there's also, an interesting concept is, oh, well, but then you should, you can try and actively protect your copyright. But because a lot of these systems are not transparent as to where their data comes from, how do you know your copyright is being violated? How can you protect your copyright when you don't know it's being stolen? And, it's great that I think some of the biggest voices in music, etc., are speaking out because they are speaking out. They're in a position and they have a voice to do so. There are many struggling artists that don't have that power, that don't have that platform, and it is their work, where it's absolutely core that they make their living from it, that's being taken. So I think it's just really, there's more of a fight back about AI right now, which I think is really, really interesting. And, and I think more dissenting voices are needed to challenge the kind of main narrative at the moment, because a lot of that is also driven by narratives of fear. If you don't use AI, you'll miss out. If you don't use AI, you'll be left behind. and and don't know about you, but anything that's driven by a narrative of fear can't be a good thing. Like, and it's also remembering that there are vast swathes of the planet that are already left behind, that are already missing out, and they are not part of this push, for AI. And so how is that fair? Like in a world where we seem to have access to so much power that could transform lives, what are we using it for?
And are we distributing it fairly? And that is not the case at the moment, right? So speaking of which, that takes us very nicely onto the work that you're doing with diverse AI. Can you tell us a bit more about what you're working on there?
Well, diverse AI is a bit of I guess, a passion project of Toju Duke, our founder and me, co-founder of it. We set it up. It was about just under 2 years ago now, because we're both diverse people working in the field of AI, and we just feel that we want to help support and grow that diversity in the field. AI and technology as a whole is recognized as not being particularly diverse, and diversity is key to ensuring that technologies, are for the benefit of as many people as possible. So we kind of kicked it off. It's a not-for-profit community interest company. It's run in our spare time on a voluntary basis. So obviously there's peaks and troughs of activity, but because the reality is life gets in the way. We had some great volunteers come on board, and once again, it's the ebb and flow of people who can dedicate time, and those who can't. But what we're trying to do, is essentially bring together communities of diverse people that work in AI to, there's peer support, knowledge exchange, and just bringing a safe space to try and build the community. But there's also, we have a lot of we went through a phase where we did a lot of educational offerings. One of our volunteers did this fantastic job of curating learning journeys around generative AI and etc. It's just to make them accessible to as many people as possible. We're trying to spotlight diverse people who work in AI. You could go to conferences, tech conferences, where you have many a manel, like male panels, all male panels, and the excuse is, oh, we couldn't find a female or someone that isn't white, and you're like, really, seriously, and so it's just trying to, I think in general, it's just trying to do our part however we can to try and support diversity in AI. We ran a series of webinar events as well, showcasing some of the expertise of our members. But at the moment, it's on a slight trough, I think, because life does get in the way, but it's there, and we're always looking for, keen volunteers that want to help and get involved. One thing Toja and I always tried to say is that, look, it needs to be easy. We need people to be able to lead with their passion on what they really care about, because ultimately everyone's a volunteer. It is their own time that they're giving to this, and we want it to be something that they are passionate and invested in. So if there's any of the listeners out there that want to get involved, help us organize events, whatever, please get in touch, because Toju and I would very much welcome it. Toju's based in London. I'm based in just outside Edinburgh, but so we have a Scotland, England coverage there on things. But yeah, no, diverse AI is something, there's a lot of groups like us, that all have similar challenges around, there's no co-funding, it's all volunteer driven, so everything goes in ebbs and flows. But the thing is, all this, obviously, what's going on in the US at the moment is very alarming and distressing, where, anything around diversity is seen as something bad and must be got rid of, which is very worrying. And I don't know what it's like for a lot of the similar organizations working in the US right now. But in the UK, obviously, there's lots of fantastic groups, lots of obviously fantastic groups focused on gender diversity specifically, like we were both involved in Women in AI, which is a global initiative, which is really great. And there's other groups like Girl Geeks, what was it, Queer Coders or whatever. There's essentially a lot of great groups, and in the US there's like Black and AI, etc. So I think there's a lot of groups trying to do their part, and I think as long as everyone still, there are people wanting to do something, then all the, the more the merrier, I think. And hopefully, we can all band together at some point to try and achieve, a common goal, which is essentially to, diversify the world of tech in its input and its outputs, because ultimately that's how technologies like AI are going to benefit, humanity as a whole.
That's a big project to have as a sort of a side project, isn't it? It's a huge undertaking, and you said right at the beginning of that answer about life getting in the way and stopping you. And unfortunately, we're going to run out of time today, so we need to wrap up quickly. But before we do wrap up, we just wanted to ask this question of, I think what you've described is a world of, and a situation where it's quite difficult to see the wood from the trees sometimes, particularly if you're a leader of a small organization or a business or a charity and starting to explore this. So, as most of our listeners will be in a position where they're starting to explore this, what advice would you give to them about making the best start to their AI research, and how do they make sure that includes inclusion and diversity at the heart of it?
Excellent question. I'm going to do a bit of a plug if you don't mind, but I think ultimately, what we hear from a lot of businesses, as a lot of tech effort, tech support, AI support efforts are focused on businesses that are already further along on the journey. There are a lot, but the truth is the majority are right at the beginning, have no idea where to start. And what we hear is that a lot of businesses want to do the right thing. They just have no idea where to start because it's so noisy. And they're obviously constantly being bombarded by vendors going, oh, we can do this, we can do this, we can do that for your company. So, I think what we're trying to do in Scotland is, one of our key things is the Scottish AI Playbook. It's a resource that's free and aimed at businesses to help kickstart them on their AI journey, which is grounded in the values of trustworthy, ethics, and inclusion. But also this Friday, 28th of February, obviously this might not be going out before then, we're relaunching our flagship public AI literacy program, Living with AI. And ultimately this we've had 2 iterations of it before. We've got a brand new shiny version launching on Friday, and this is about empowering people with the foundations of AI to help them navigate this world. It's presents a balanced approach. It's not saying that AI is magic. It's not saying that AI is going to kill us all. It's just, this is what AI technologies are. Here are some of the challenges, and this is how it currently can be used in the various aspects of your life. And then that provides a great foundation for people to explore more should they want to, instead of coming in at a point where those foundations are missing and you're kind of being bombarded with all these different narratives around AI when you actually don't even know what the basic foundations are. And I think advice for businesses is to I would say, I'm not saying all business is bad. It isn't at all, and there are great people working in tech. But I think, a lot of knowledge about AI is being distributed by those with a product to sell you, whereas we don't have skin in the game in that we're publicly funded. We're there to help people on their journey. I think I said at the beginning, every organization should consider AI. Have a look, find out what it is, and determine whether it will solve your problems. But you got to figure out your problems first. You got to work out what your problems are first, because technology is not going to solve people problems. You're gonna just keep plow money into this big black hole of techno solutionism if you don't actually understand what your problem is. It might fix your symptom for a little bit, but then the problem will always remain. AI is not going to fix people problems. You've got to fix people problems first. I know AI seems like an easier way out because people problems are really hard to fix, but if you inject technologies like AI into poorly functioning systems, you're just gonna make the systems function worse in a more efficient way. So I think a lot of it is about identifying your problem and finding out if AI is the solution for it. And if it's not, it's okay. It really is okay. And I think that's part of the problem. If you come to the end of your investigation, your research, and you're like, actually, I don't think that's going to do anything for us, that's totally okay. And not enough people are saying that, because I think there's this pressure to feel that, at the end of your research, you should go, oh, of course, AI can do this, and that for me. But the truth is, it probably won't do this, and that for you. You can try, if you have the resources and money and to do so, but it might not do it. And then you've wasted your time and your money when you could have just continued doing what you were doing, or perhaps fixing it in a different way with a different technology. It might not be AI. It could just be very basic data analytics. That could be what you need. So don't be afraid of AI. There's a lot of fear. Just go out and get the knowledge. Do the research. We're trying to put out as many resources out there as possible. There are many other organizations that are trying as well. And I think the thing is, just keep your head, keep your heed, as I think the Scottish term is, just there is easy to get caught up in it because it is exciting, it is shiny, it is cool, it is fun. But we're kind of at this point where we should really be looking beyond that, because I think a lot of businesses are starting to realize, hold on a minute, this is not giving us the productivity gains we're looking for. This is not actually creating the efficiencies, and there's an increasing amount of papers and studies and reports coming out around that. But they're not the ones you're going to hear about. You've got to search for those ones.
Absolutely. What great advice for leaders to end on. Thank you so much, Steph. Thank you so much for sharing all your incredibly thoughtful, balanced advice about AI. It's exactly what the social sector needs to hear right now. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Many thanks to Steph for joining us on the podcast, and what a refreshing dive into AI and our planet and a lot of the ethical issues that come with the territory that was. Thank you, Steph. I hope you're as energised by the discussion as we were.
Yes, a big thank you to Steph. We'll share Steph's details about the work that she's doing in the show notes, as usual. And as always, we really do appreciate that you've listened all the way to the end of the episode. Thank you very much. You can support the podcast by leaving us a 5-star review wherever you've listened to us, and it really does help us to reach more people. So if you've enjoyed what you heard, do share us with a friend or a colleague.
Thank you so much for listening today, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks with a brand new episode of Starts at the Top.
See you then, and bye for now.